Okay, so let's get started. So I see a lot of excitement about AI. Everyone's talking about it. It's filling my feeds with lots of information and snippets. But when speaking to clients, people are really struggling to say, how do I get from the hype to value? Now, I put this question to Ben. I said, look, Ben, people are buying handfuls of Copilot licenses. They're having a dabble. Maybe some people are buying SharePoint Premium, but they're really struggling to see the real world use cases. So do you think you could sit down, pull together some examples, which we can then share with everybody? And at that point, Ben said, well, why don't we just do a webinar on this? So here we are. So Ben, I said, when to shape this, I said, look, think about, the people who are going to be making decisions around this and need to be aware of what's going on in the AI world. So it's going to be people, chief information officers, IT directors, IT managers, or it could be people who are working, heavily with documents on a day-to-day basis, whether you're maybe a document controller, or maybe you're a SharePoint expert administrator and looking to learn a little bit of maybe what you can do. So that's how I set the scene. Given all that, Ben, what are people going to take away from today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rupert. So yeah, we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at understand the differences between generative AI and machine learning. We're going to look at some real world examples, some real live demos. And then we're going to look at, in particular, how we can use machine learning to classify and extract data from documents.
Perfect. Okay. So when I think about AI, I think it really comes into two core camps. There's a generative AI side and there's a machine learning side to it. So when I think about generative AI, I'm thinking about maybe a digital assistant, so some kind of chatbot where maybe trying to resolve an issue that I have or query some information or knowledge. That's one side. Taking that a bit further, have something called intelligent search. So we all know that SharePoint search has got better over the years, but it's nothing's quite as good as maybe that Chat GPT style search experience. So how can I use natural language to find the information which sits within my knowledge base or within my policy library or within my intranet? Now, as I teed up intranet there, content creation. A lot of our clients build out SharePoint intranets. They have great ambitions to write content, but then they have ideas, but not sure how to turn that into an article. So content creation, that is a key value that people are using generative AI for. And then on the flip side of that, when we've got too much information, how can we take that information and summarize it? So that's the key use cases I think I see around generative AI. Then on the flip side, machine learning doesn't get the same amount of PR as Copilot and the Gen AI side. Yet it's been around longer, but maybe it's the audience, maybe it's a bit more complicated. But can you give us some use cases so people understand what machine learning can actually achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tend to think of machine learning as the more sort of traditional AI. And if we think of some examples in the Microsoft space, it could be things like classifying documents, maybe classifying a set of documents as to whether it's a contract, invoice, a legal document, for instance. Things like field extraction. So it could be pulling out the values of contracts or invoices, start dates, project names, etc. Key phrase extraction. So it's things like identifying specific phrases that most accurately summarize the document. Personal data identification. So things like social security numbers, passport numbers, or driving licenses, and pulling that information out. Image description. So this could be useful in a scenario around accessibility or making images more searchable, for instance. And then finally, this idea around named entity recognition. So it could be things like pulling out the names of companies or people or perhaps products from a given document. And what we're seeing actually is with the advent of the generative AI, this is really starting to enhance some of those capabilities within the machine learning space. So what we'll see with the field extraction scenario, for instance, is that concept is enhanced by the power of generative AI as it starts to overlay and support the machine learning scenarios.
Okay, so look, given that we're limited time, I said, look, let's pick out 5 key scenarios and let's do live demos of these scenarios where we can. And so we can see what these are and maybe some value that they might bring to people. But this is the business side of it. What's running behind the scenes, Ben? What technology are we going to be touching on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the generative AI side, we're looking at, in particular, Microsoft Copilot, which is really, really prevalent, really key. So that products that targeted at end users as a productivity enhancer. Copilot Studio, which is much more targeted at sort of Power Platform developers and helps you build things like agents and those types of things, or chat-based experiences. And then underpinning all of that is the OpenAI capability, which is effectively what ChatGPT is built on, but deployed to Azure in your environment with your data. On the machine learning side, we're looking at SharePoint Premium, which is effectively an enhancement that natively integrates into SharePoint libraries and much more targeted at end users. AI Builder, which is targeted at Power Platform developers, again, if you want to kind of integrate with your Power Apps, for instance. And then Azure AI Document Intelligence. So again, the technology that's underpinning all of that, but a bit more involved to set up. And what we're seeing with this, my general rule of thumb is that everything on the left is more targeted at end users, everything on the right of each box is more targeted at developers and that underlying tech. And in terms of the demos we're going to be looking at today, we'll look at a Copilot demo, we'll look at a scenario where we've created our own chatbot that's talking directly to Azure OpenAI. And then on the machine learning side, we've got a set of demos that are using Azure AI Document Intelligence, which we've then brought into SharePoint.
And I think the reason why that's really interesting is the commercial considerations which go along with that. So the cost of doing these kind of activities, I think you'll find that fascinating. Let's start with Copilot. So here's a Copilot wheel. This has been around a bit. It's probably already out of date due to the speed that Microsoft are adding new Copilots. And the area we focus on is what we call modern work. So that's everything you find under effectively office.com. So it's things like SharePoint, it's apps like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Microsoft Teams. So Ben, modern work is generally about end user productivity. One of the first things that I wanted to touch on is the challenge around information overload. We get so much information these days. How can AI help us? And have you got a scenario where, you face information overload yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just take a quick look at that quick screenshot. So this is it's a screenshot that was taken about 3 weeks ago. That number's gone up. So this is my inbox. I have 13,000 unread emails in my inbox. That is a lot. It's become so much information that it's impossible to really stay on top of it. So effectively, I just kind of ignore it and then flag up the things that I need to deal with, and just leave the rest as unread. So that can be quite triggering for some people. But yeah, effectively, if there was a way of just being able to summarize this and being able to, really tap into the core things that I need to worry about, this is where that summarization concept becomes really useful. Another area that we're seeing an awful lot of information overload on is in Teams meetings. We're in Teams meetings all the time. So we've got Teams meetings all day, every day. There's so many notes and actions and things that we need to capture. It's a real struggle to stay on top of it. So we're just going to demonstrate this in a video that we recorded of how we can use the AI capability in Teams. So this is a meeting that we carried out a few weeks ago preparing for a previous webinar. And what we can see here is we've got the recording of the meeting, and in the middle we have this AI notes area, which is something that's part of Microsoft Teams Premium, which auto-generates notes based on the meeting. On the right-hand side, we then have the chat-based experience, which is something that comes in as part of Microsoft Copilot. So if you want to be able to interrogate and ask questions about the meeting, so as we can see, I'm asking questions about what the key topics that we discussed during that meeting. I can go through and do that and ask more questions and get more detail as I need. And what we'll see in a second is I want a bit more detail on the external sharing scenario, for instance, and it's just going to expand that detail in a minute.
So Ben, behind the scenes, this is what a transcript being created out of that meeting, and effectively Microsoft put a sort of chat GPT layer on top of it to pull out this information.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly it. So effectively, the meeting gets recorded, you get a transcript, and then the AI notes get generated automatically off of that, which are in the center of the screen there. As I say, that's just part of Teams Premium. You don't need Copilot for it. And then if you want to be able to interrogate and ask questions, that comes with Copilot. But again, the source of that content is the transcript from the meeting.
Yeah, and we're seeing quite a lot of clients actually using Teams Premium as the medium of, that's actually good enough, and I don't need to pay the full whack for Copilot. So that's quite an interesting one there. That's meetings. The next thing I want to touch on, Ben, is documents. And we're receiving a lot of information, and a lot of documents that I receive have, maybe marketing material there, which maybe isn't that important. But sometimes I'm also looking at legal documents as well. And for, if you're in procurement, you can probably whiz through this fairly quickly. If you're not, there must be other ways of getting value from this, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. So these master services agreements, they're very much legal focused documents written by legal professionals. But if you're a layperson and you just want to understand some of the key points, then being able to use summarization can be really, really useful without having to read every single line. So let's just take a quick look at that within my demo environment here. So I've got a set of documents available to me. I know that this is a master services agreement. I'm accessing this within OneDrive. This functionality has been released to OneDrive and will be coming to SharePoint very soon at the time of this recording. If I click on the Copilot button there, I can click on the button that says Summarize. So as I say, this is something that's part of Microsoft 365 Copilot that you'll need to have a license to be able to use. And we can see that we're getting a summary from this document. It's picked out that it's a master services agreement, who it's between. It's picking out key points and bullets. It's not simply just regurgitating the section headings, but it's pulling through those things that it sees as being really important. So things like confidentiality and intellectual property. It's summarizing what the key status of those clauses is, for instance. And again, if I wanted to go and ask further questions of it, I could click on the Ask a Question button and then have that more chat-based dialogue that we saw earlier.
Cool. Okay, that's a great demo. Let's go on to the next piece. So Ben, intelligent search. So SharePoint search has definitely got better over the years, but it still requires you matching the same keyword that is in the document. And we're getting more and more used to using, such as a chat GPT or natural language type of approach of getting information out. So if we think about how we apply intelligent search into a document management world, what's that look like? What are some of the benefits of that? And I've often heard the word vector search being mentioned in internal meetings, so maybe you could explain what that is as well.
Okay. All right, good stuff. So let's take a quick look at that scenario. So I've got two demos I'm going to run through now. So the first is using something called a Copilot agent. So effectively, a Copilot agent is something that you can create that's targeted to a SharePoint site or a set of documents or a set of or a particular library within a SharePoint site. So you're effectively limiting the scope of the source documents to get more relevant results out of what you need. So I've clicked on the Copilot button within the marketing site, and I've got a scenario where I was actually in a customer meeting a little while back, and I was looking for the PowerPoint deck that we did for one of our previous webinars. And actually what happened is it had been renamed and actually moved into a different location. So it kind of threw me off guard in that meeting. And actually what I was able to do is use Copilot to give it a sense of what I'm looking for, so the context of what I'm looking for, and then get a response. So let's take a look at that now. So find me the PowerPoint deck that talks about the best way to structure SharePoint into a set of hubs. So while this is running, so effectively what's happening here is Copilot is interpreting what it is that I'm asking, and then it is searching documents based on their meaning. So it's not just matching keywords and phrases and text. It's actually looking at understanding the way that what is in that document. So this search concept is called vector search, which is basically where the document is almost turned into a really big kind of number or a vector, and my question is also turned into a number, and whatever documents closely match that result will come back. So you don't have to match keywords, it's actually matching the sort of meaning or the sense of the document, which is far more powerful. And that can even go as far as the meaning but in different languages, for instance, which is incredibly powerful. So we can see it's found this deck. What's the best way to structure SharePoint? It gives me a quick summary of what that deck talks about. It looks like that's probably the right one. Let's have a look at that reference. Yeah, so this is the deck. It had been renamed, so as I say, that kind of threw me off guard, but I was able to use this to actually go and get that document back without even having to filter through a set of results. Another scenario then is within our policy hub. So we have a policy solution. We have this search experience here, but again, as people are starting to expect, they may want to ask questions about given policies and have that kind of question and answer experience. So we've created an interface that sits on top of Azure OpenAI. And what that means is we can choose which documents are going to make up part of this solution. So if, for instance, we're only going to pass through the published versions of documents as opposed to any kind of work in progress, and we have control over that, and then it means we can go and sort of ask those questions as we need to. So I'm going to just ask a question: what is the procedure for requesting flexible working? So let's see.
So what we're doing here, Ben, is protecting, in this scenario, your HR employees from getting the same questions over and over again, and then they can deal with the edge cases, the unique scenarios. So small investment in IT yields a big investment in time saving. And the other side of this is that when you raise that question, you're getting an instant response. You're not waiting for that HR person to come back to their email, or maybe if you're a shift worker, you're not waiting for them to come back in on Monday. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see it's given me a quite nice summary from this. Some of the key points from that meeting, or sorry, from that document, it's given me a clear representation of the document if I wanted to go and follow up with some further information. And then the other thing this does, which we're starting to become quite used to with these chatbot style experiences, is come back with a set of follow-up options or questions that I might want to ask. So let's maybe ask this question: how to prepare for the meeting when we're going to have that meeting about flexible working.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one because actually one client fed back to us saying people are finding out more about policies just because they keep clicking on the follow-on questions, and that's actually creating a little bit of interest and curiosity about what's in those documents.
Okay,
perfect. Okay, that's an interesting use case as well, that we've actually got two references there, and then what you've got in your bullet points is the reference to which document it's pointing to. So very much with policies, it's all about detail. You can then go say, well, actually, the policy I need to go look at is number 1. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to pop up in the screen. That's pretty cool. Okay, so taking that, Ben, the other side of, let's say intranets is very much content creation. So content creation, we do, as I said at the top of the call, we do a lot of intranets, but people get stuck with content. They have ideas, and I think that really AI has broken down a lot of barriers about what do I write about it, how do I write about it, what level of detail can I turn this into bullet points, or can I base this off some previous content? So Ben, have you got a couple of examples of how we can use AI to help with content creation?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look. I think what we're going to do is just jump back to our policy scenario here. So I've just sort of teed up this question about remote working. Again, we've got our working from home policy. And let's say, for instance, I wanted to promote this policy as a news article. So, to summarize some of the key points, which I could then publish onto an intranet. So the previous examples were very much about finding some information and answering some questions from it. And now what we're looking at doing is creating new content off the back of existing content. So creating a news article from a document, or creating a set of FAQs, for instance. So I'm just going to paste in a prompt that I captured earlier. So we'll have a look at that. So summarize this response with an intranet news article that describes some details of the benefits and provides 3 detailed FAQs. So let's just have a look at that.
And I think, depending on the kind of news you want, you can also set the tone of voice. Is this good news? Is this more serious? And so you can get that right as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's referenced a couple of different documents here. I've got follow-up questions I might want to ask. But what I'm going to do is just take that content, and actually I'm just going to copy it and paste it into a new news article that I'm going to go and publish. So if I just go new news post within the Policy Hub, I can create a SharePoint news page. And I'm just going to go and paste that content, just take that out, put it in the title. We'd do a bit of tidy up. I'm not going to worry about that right now. So we tidy this up a little bit. We may even want to, or probably should, reference the actual policy itself using the file and media web part, for instance, put a nice image on it, etc. And then once we're done, we can post and publish that to our intranet homepage. So another scenario, if you come back to the webinar deck that we were talking about, so another scenario here then is, so another scenario here then is taking this SharePoint architecture deck. I want to be able to create a LinkedIn post promoting some of the things that we talked about in our webinar. So we created this content, or maybe this is something we'll be doing in preparation for a webinar where we've got our deck and we want to generate some interest in the webinar before people attend. So I've got that deck and I want to go and create a LinkedIn post that can help me promote it. So summarize this PowerPoint deck into a LinkedIn article that that describes the things to do, the things to stop doing, has a controversial title, because we do like a controversial title to capture the eye in LinkedIn, and a set of next steps. Let's see what this comes back with. I've even spelt title wrong, so hopefully it was able to figure out what I meant, even though I kind of spelt it slightly incorrectly. So I do find with this, with Copilot, you get some funny artifacts as it's scrolling, but once it's finished, it's pretty good. So again, we've got our title, Why Your SharePoint Structure is Failing and How to Fix It. So that's sort of quite catchy. It's got some good summary content in there, the things to do. So it's recognized those instructions and pulled out some of those key things. And I can go and take that and paste it into LinkedIn and then sort of promote it. So, again, we're not, some of us aren't necessarily quite as comfortable as writing really strong copy. And for something like this, you don't necessarily need to go and get a dedicated copywriter for it. So this has given me a pretty good starting point that I'll then want to just tweak and put my own tone of voice and make sure it's using the kind of right language, etc. But as a good starting point, yeah, this is pretty good. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, and I think the way a lot of people describe it is treat Copilot or ChatGPT like your intern. The more instructions you get, the more value you're going to get at the other end, but you will need to do a review. You can't, just send it out the door. And that's where we are today anyway. So Ben, I think that wraps up the Gen AI piece. I want to move over to the machine learning and particularly the document processing side. So what I want to talk about is classification of documents and then extraction of information from the documents that we classify. So those are the scenarios. I mean, a lot of people, we don't like doing metadata. It seems tedious and painful, but we know there's value in doing it. We can use that metadata to drive policies around documents information, how we're going to protect those documents for. So there's some of the scenarios, Ben. Do you want me to take through what is a document model and how do we create one?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just have a look at the document model process and just talk about what we mean. So realistically, what I'm talking about here is an AI model, AI machine learning model that is able to carry out tasks on documents. And those tasks could be classifying them into this category or that category, extracting information from them, or some of those other scenarios that we talked about earlier. And the process that we have to go through when we're doing this typically is as follows. We start off with gathering some documents. So going and finding good examples of documents that we already have or we've already worked on to be able to do what we need to do. We're then going to label them. So if it's a classification model, we're going to label them with the appropriate categories that are relevant to that document. If it's a field extraction model, we're going to effectively label the set of fields that we want and show the model where to get them from those documents. Once we've got those examples, we need to train the model. So this is where the AI model learns based on the examples that you've given it. Now, fortunately, we only have to train it with a relatively small number of documents compared to if we were going to do this ourselves, not using some of the Microsoft tech, because Microsoft have kind of pre-trained a whole load of these models. So you can actually get going really quickly on this. Once the model is trained, we need to test it. So typically you'll set aside 30% of your documents for testing, 70% for training. So we're going to take our test documents, apply it to the model and see what results come back with and make sure we're happy with it. And then finally, we're going to deploy that model into the real world to start predicting new documents moving forward, so we can start getting business value out of this model. So the first 4 stages are much more about creating and tuning the model, and then the final stage is deploying it and making it available to start using it in the real world.
Okay, so that's the theory, Ben. Can we see it in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look. So I've got a couple of models here that we're going to run through. So the first, we're going to focus on a classification model. I'm doing this within Azure AI Document Builder. Or Document Intelligence Studio, I should say. I've uploaded a whole load of existing documents here, and if I click on them, I can see the document within this pane here, and I can see I've got some categories that I can assign to it. If I wanted to, I could go and create a new category, or just simply pick and choose from one of the ones I've already created. If I just collapse these categories on the right-hand side, you can see within those, I've got 4 different categories, and I've got 5 documents of each category. So that's quite key. You need at least 5 documents when you're building these models. 5 documents for each category. But the other thing to be aware of is you really need to balance how many documents you have. There's no point, or you really don't want to do, have 100 statements of work but only 5 MSAs, because the model's not going to understand how to interpret that appropriately. So you need to balance the number of categories you've had. So in this case, we've got 5 of each. Once I've uploaded those documents and tagged them, the next thing that I would do is click on the train button. I've done that already. It takes a few minutes, so we're not going to do that live. So you upload them, you train it. And then we need to test it. So I'm going to get some new documents that I've set aside for testing, upload them, and see what we come back with. So I've got some statements of work here. Let's just go and drag and drop them. I'm going to drag a couple of playback documents that we use. These are all fictitious company names, so nothing to worry about. I'll grab a couple of MSAs. Okay, so I've uploaded my test documents, and then I'm going to run analysis on these. So let's just kick that off. I'm going to kick it off for all of them. You can see the first one's finished already. And let's see what we've come up with. So this document, this is a master services agreement, and that has been correctly identified as an MSA over on the right-hand side with a confidence score of 80%. So the confidence score is effectively how likely it is that this document matches the category that's been assigned to it. Nothing is ever going to be 100%. You almost don't want it to be 100%, because if it is, it's a very good chance that your model has become overfit and isn't going to generalize particularly well to other examples of these types of documents. So I'm pretty happy with 80% there. Again, master services agreement, again, 80%, really happy with that. This is a slightly different type of document. It's a playback deck. 64% in this case, well, 65% I would say in this case, but it has still correctly classified it. I'm not too worried about 65%. It's really when it gets to 50% or lower that I'm a bit more concerned. This is also a playback deck, but actually much higher in confidence, so 82%. So this perhaps represents, as far as the model is concerned, a better example of a playback deck. This is the statement of work. Yep, that's 83%, really happy with that. 88% for that statement of work, happy with that too. 86% for that statement of work, happy with that too. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that model. It's classifying it well. Nothing to be too alarmed about in terms of those confidence scores. So the next thing is, say, given I have classified my documents and I've identified statements of work or sort of contracts, I want to then pull out information from those statements of work. So effectively what I want to do is get things like project names, customer names, amounts, dates, etc. So the first thing we have to do when we're creating a field extraction model in this case is to define that schema, as we can see here. So what types of fields are we trying to get, and what are their, what their sort of data types as such. We then need to label it. So again, we need a minimum of 5 examples to go through and do that. So as I go through each of these examples, I'll zoom in a bit. I can see over on the right-hand side, each of those fields is telling me where it's pulling that information from. So effectively, you go and drag and drop the boxes around the text that you want for each field to then tell it what it needs to be. So that's the project name, that's the customer name, the amount. You can see where the amount's coming from. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we go through that, we drag those boxes around each of those fields on the right page that you want and apply it to each field there. And then we go through and just do that for each of those documents. So once that's done, I'm ready to train my model. So I'm going to go to build models and I'll click on it and I'll build it, or I'll train the one that I've already done. Okay, that's completed. This is the model that we're working with today. And again, I'm not going to do this because this takes a little while. It takes about 20 minutes or so, roughly speaking, for a field extraction model. And then I'm going to test it. Thank you, Microsoft. So I'm going to upload some test files there. And I'm going to kick these off.
So Ben, it's a similar process as the classification, but this time we're pulling out the fields or the entities.
That's exactly it. Yeah, so it's the same document model process. It's just slightly different information. So that'll take a few seconds to run.
And we're looking at the Azure AI document intelligence approach for this. There are a couple of other approaches, and we're going to touch on those in a minute, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. So let's see what this has come back with. So again, I'm just going to zoom in to make this a little bit easier to see. Customer name, it's pulled that through. I'm pretty happy with that. And for the customer name, it's pulled out a confidence of just under 80%. So I'm happy with that too. The amount, so I can see the amount has come through on page 3 here. And again, it's given it a confidence score of 78%. Yeah, pretty happy with that. Now, interestingly, the effort, it hasn't been found. So it hasn't found an effort in this particular case. And it's 67% confident that it hasn't found that effort.
So that means that effort doesn't exist in that document as far as it's concerned.
That's correct.
10% sure. Yeah, okay.
It's 67% sure that it couldn't find it and it doesn't exist. That's exactly it. The end date is 2 weeks. Now, interestingly, that's not a date, that's a duration. So again, it's a bit less confident at 70%, but it's still reasonably happy that it thinks it's got something for me.
Got you.
Project name, 82%. Now, interestingly, it's pulled it back for some reason from page 11 in the header, which appears on every page. I'm not too worried because it's got the right value, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. And the confidence is still pretty high. And then the start date, 73%.
So what's interesting here, Ben, is the confidence level is at a field level, whereas obviously for a document we're doing, or when we're classifying the document type, we're doing it at document level.
That's right. Yeah, exactly that. So in this case, it's each one of those individual values has its own confidence and almost needs to be processed individually, which is partly the reason why it takes a bit longer to run as well. If we have a look at these other documents here, now we're starting to see some quite low confidence scores actually. So on this particular field, which is effort, 0 hours per month, and it's 46%, and it's even flagged that up in red. So it's really not sure about this. And same thing for the end date, which is even lower at 40% or 39%. Now, what this is really highlighting to me is that even though this is a statement of work, it's actually quite a different statement of work from, say, the documents that I trained it on. So this is actually a statement of work for a service contract as opposed to a project contract, which is quite different. So it's not actually been able to pull out the right type of fields. So the other scenario here is this document, which is pulling out the client name in this particular case. But as we take a look at that, that client name confidence score is quite low. It's 51%. So although it's not red, it's still pretty low. I want to take notice of this. And that's quite interesting because in this case, it's actually got a customer. What I really wanted is the customer name and not the client name. But because there's both in this particular case, it's had a stab, pulled out the customer name, but not the, the client name, but not the customer name. So really what this is highlighting, and again, the previous example is highlighting, I didn't train it with enough data to really make it relevant. So 5 documents was okay, but the first point was I really should have separated out and had a separate model for my success contract pull through. And even taking that back to my classification model, I should have separated out success SOWs from project SOWs. And then in this scenario, where I had the customer name and the client name, I realized that my training data didn't actually have that. I didn't use a scenario that just had, or that had both scenarios, both customer and client in my training data. So it hasn't actually correctly interpreted what to do. So what this really highlights is as many examples as you're able to do is going to really strengthen the capability and really increase those confidence scores to something a bit more workable. So I've created a model and now I want to actually use it in SharePoint. So I've created my models. I want to use them in SharePoint. Let's take a look at what we can do here.
So what you just showed us, Evan, wasn't in SharePoint. That's in a separate environment. That's part of Azure.
Yes.
And now we need to bring the two together somehow.
Absolutely. So I've created a model in Azure and now I need to use it. So what I'm going to do is I've created a Power Automate flow here that is going to talk to those models in Azure via a REST API that is exposed by those models. You need a Power Automate premium license to be able to do that in this particular case, but there are other options. So I'm going to kick off this Power Automate that says classify document. Give that a minute to run and just do it for all three.
Now you're doing this manually document by document. I'm assuming there's ways that we could automate this if we're running this at scale. I don't expect everyone to run for every single document to start off a flow.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm only doing this manually just so that we can record it more easily in the video. The reality is you might have something perhaps on a schedule that processes any documents that come in over a certain period of time, or you might have your Power Automates to trigger, so anytime a new document is added. But because those things can sometimes take a few minutes to trigger, it's just purely for the purposes of recording, we're doing it manually. And actually, the other thing that you'll see in a second is we've got two separate flows, but in reality, you could build that into a single flow that does both a classification and an extraction.
Okay.
So let's just refresh my screen. So that's completed, which is great. So it's correctly identified the document types. This is a statement of work, another statement of work. This is a master services agreement. And again, it's pulled through those confidence scores. So yeah, it's 85% confident for the two SOWs, 80% confident for the MSA. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, of course, what you could do with those confidence scores is tie that into your workflow, or maybe even create a view in SharePoint that says any confidence scores lower than perhaps 60%, you want to take notice of that as a document manager or document controller. But if it's above 80%, I'm pretty happy. Okay. So now I've got my statements of work. Let's go and run the field extraction model against those. So I'm going to flip over to my SOWs view, kick off the other Power Automate, which is the extract fields.
Okay, so at this point, we've classified the document, so we know we're working with statements of work. So therefore, we know that, well, we hope that these fields are within that document. And we're doing that painful work of populating metadata around documents, and that could then drive a project creation process or a workspace process or something along those lines using those key data. Okay.
Exactly.
Ben, I understand this might take a little while to work. So should we just go back at the deck, look at a few of the tech options, and also what that comes out of from a commercial perspective?
Okay.
Perfect. So the three key technologies that we're talking about here in machine learning, we've got SharePoint Premium on one side, which I've described as user-friendly, that sort of power user type element, AI Builder sitting in the middle, and then Azure AI Document Intelligence. So Ben, you just will give a bit more detail about each of those, and then we can talk into a particular use case where we've actually looked at the commercials against each of these options.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, on the left-hand side, SharePoint Premium is much more sort of user-friendly. It's natively integrated directly into document libraries, much more targeted at sort of end users, document managers, document controllers who want to be able to go and experiment and build these models themselves and just have them run straight away. So, really easy to set up and use. AI Builder targeted at Power Platform developers. Let's say you wanted to create a Power App where you could look at documents and pull out information from them as part of a kind of invoice approval, custom application of some sort. It would be really good for that. And then on the right-hand side, Azure AI Document Intelligence. And as I said, the key thing here is that the technology is the same. The underlying AI technology is the same. It's just how you use it is different. So in the AI Document Intelligence use case, you don't really get anything other than a REST API to talk to. If you want to build those integrations, you've got to do it yourself. But with that, it means that it's actually much more cost effective to run those models, even if it takes a little bit more effort to set it up. So generally, the rule of thumb is the easier it is to set up, the more expensive it's going to be to run compared to those slightly harder to configure models.
Okay, well, you teed me up nicely there. So Ben, I said, look, I'm going to come up with an example, and then I'd like you to price it up using those different options so people get a feel of what those are capable of. So in this example, I've got 500 documents. There are 4 different types of document in there, for example, contract, MSA, invoice, for example, and the average document is 20 pages each. So the first thing I wanted to be able to do is classify it. So I would just say, look, bring out those statements of work. So running that classify model, I've worked out now got 100 contracts on an average 20 pages each. And so now I've got those, I want to go and extract that key information we talked about. So client, project, start date, effort. So that's for scenario. Now you've gone away and crunched your numbers, and you're just going to take us through each of 3 options and how we got to the cost of each of these solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So with SharePoint Premium, as I said, targeted at SharePoint site owners, easy to set up. The cost for SharePoint Premium to do this is 5 cents per page, and that is for each model that you apply. So for that scenario, if I wanted to identify the documents within this library out of those 500, that's going to cost me 500 cents per model that I apply to process those source sets of documents. So if I've got 4 different types of models because I want to identify statements of work and do something with that, et cetera, that's actually going to be 4 times that. So we're talking $2,000 to run that initial set of classification and field extraction. So that is a bit of a gotcha. You get charged for each model that gets applied to your documents. And if you have multiple documents in a library, every model is going to be applied to it. The next scenario is AI Builder. So as I said, Power Platform developers, a bit more complex, but more flexible. The key thing here is that there is no document classification model available at time of this video within AI Builder. So that means you're going to have to have done your extraction. Sorry, you're going to have to have done your classification beforehand using some other mechanism. But once you've got that and you've classified them, you can run that extraction model. That's going to cost you $100, again, 5 cents per page. And then finally, we have Azure Document Intelligence, targeted at developers because you don't get that much in terms of integration. You need to set it up yourself. More complex, much more flexible. The key thing is it does have a classification model, as we saw earlier. And also that classification model runs at a different cost to the field extraction. To classify documents is going to cost you 0.3 cents per page instead of 5 cents per page, so orders of magnitude lower. And then subsequently for the documents that we do want to extract information on, so those 100 statements of work, for instance, that's then going to cost you 3 cents per page instead of 5 cents. So we can see with that scenario, we're going to be charged $30 to classify all the documents. And then we're going to be charged $60 to process those documents and do what we need to do with them. But it comes with that cost of ease of setup. We'll need to build our own integration, whether it's Power Automate Premium, Logic Apps, or maybe some custom code, for instance.
So I think the takeaway from this is if you're doing this at scale, if you are processing a lot of documents with a lot of pages, you need to invest in Azure Document Intelligence. If it's a smaller use case, maybe SharePoint Premium AI Builder can help you on your journey. So with that, Ben, why don't we go and see how your extraction is going in your SharePoint environment?
Yep, sounds good. Let's see how that's doing. So we can see that that has completed now. We've got the amounts, we've got the customer details. So again, I can see that customer name's important. It actually matches the document title as well, which is useful. We've got the project names, the contract names, the project names. We've got the effort, start date, end date. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That's really useful, being able to just pass that document in, get that information out so I can then go and do something with it. And as I say, in this case, a good example could be to then go and notify a project manager who needs to then go and set this up, or maybe even take it as far as automatically setting up a project in another project management system, passing those values in, for instance.
Perfect. Okay, well, look, I think that brings that bit to a close. Just a couple of things then from my side. If you're thinking about AI projects, I think the first thing is, although technology is awesome, you need to think of your scenarios first. So what are you trying to solve? We showed some examples around retrieving information, around analyzing information. So look at your scenarios first rather than saying, I've got technology, where's the problem? The next thing really important is data quality. So in some of the early examples, we talked about using intelligent search against authoritative data. So authoritative data is maybe something which has been approved and it's something that we're happy for people to search against. But also when we're thinking about field extraction, well, we're going to classify the document first to make sure that we're extracting data from the right kind of document. And then the final piece is, particularly on the generative side, is end user training. So because you're not replacing an old system with a new system, there's no compulsion for people to use this technology unless you guide them. So end user training becomes more important on these kind of solutions and rollouts if you want to get true value. If you'd like a conversation with myself and explore a bit further, then just jump on our website. And if you click book a discovery call, that will drop something into my calendar. If you want to get really technical, I'll bring Ben into that call as well, so he can give you a bit of insight as well. Otherwise, that's a wrap for this webinar. Please do join us at the next one. We try and do these every month to share a bit of insight and knowledge around document management and SharePoint. But thank you for your time.